Hi, I'm Mike Glenn, and I am the president of the Engaged Church Network, and it is my privilege to welcome you to today's podcast. Joining me today is my friend Darren Tyler. Darren has been the pastor of Conduit Church for 15
years.
15 years. Time flies when you're having a good time. Conduit Church is located in South Franklin and is a thriving congregation known for its investment and engagement with missions. In fact, you just come back from Nepal on some work there. You've known about your work in Haiti. Here's how I want to talk to Darren. Darren did church planting backwards. We talk about how you plant a church and all that. He did it backwards. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this.
I'd be
setup
anxious to hear what you think
I'm
happened.
giving. Okay. As far as I have remembered from our stories and the way you've told it to me, you had a Bible study.
Yep.
Bible study was going, changing lives. Everybody's grooving, good things happening. Out of that Bible study comes, we need to do something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep,
we need to
so far.
express our Christianity in some tangible way.
Yep.
And that was Haiti.
Yeah.
Now, was that the earthquake? Was that what prompted it?
Before
the earthquake.
Yeah.
Okay.
Way before the earthquake.
Okay.
Like years and years before.
So you start going to Haiti.
Uh-huh.
And
it's pretty good. You're actually remembering this.
And then you start thinking, this is what you were in the music business, working with artists, managing career, and that kind of stuff, with a lot of the big name stuff that our people would know. So you were successful in that area, but you became more burdened and more aware, this is what I need to be doing.
Yeah.
The missions.
Yeah.
Going to Haiti, going to,
Uganda,
Uganda and all these other places I don't want to go to. I mean, and that's okay. We all got different callings in different places.
100%.
But then the question came is, how do we fund, how do we support, how do we keep alive, how do we train the future of this mission ministry?
Yeah.
And Conduit kind of congealed around that vision.
It's a funny word for it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Solidified.
Solidied
Although
around.
in those early days, it did feel more like
Jell-O
than cement. Yeah.
But because you did it backwards.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting story.
Yeah, we are a mission with a church department.
Yeah.
That the Bible study was born out of, I was working in the music world, primarily Christian music, and I had a pretty well-known evangelist ask me, one of the artists that was performing, could they bring the gospel tonight at our crusade out in LA? And I was like, no, you don't want them to do that. They don't know the gospel. And he said words that have haunted me, which was, well, isn't that a problem? And I thought, well, man, it is a problem. So I literally started a Bible study so that artists who were, selling millions of records in the Christian music world could actually know the difference between Noah and Jonah, which is so silly. But that was sort of a conversation I had with one of the guys. I'm like, oh, you're talking about Noah. There was no whale in the Noah thing. But the Bible study was born out of that. And as you know, when you go through the word goes through you. Mm-hmm. And you just can't, especially when you're doing chapter by chapter. I couldn't get past these passages about God's heart for the poor, for the powerless, for the oppressed. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of all that, I meet a guy from Haiti, one of the kids at the Bible study, who's still Toby Mac's day-to-day manager, a guy named Philip Peters, introduced me to Joe LaFleur, and he told us what was going on with his work there. And it's just like, golly, I can't do nothing about this. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of organically born that way.
Right.
No desire for a church. If you've been in the Nashville area, there's lots of really great churches here. So it didn't even occur to me that a church was growing out of it. I was an elder at a different church here in town where they were very open-handed with their ministry, and so that pastor kept poking at me, hey, this is a church and you're a pastor. It's the first time I ever floated that by my wife. She laughed and laughed and laughed. She's like, you don't even like people. How can you be a pastor? I was like, but all she'd ever experienced is my whole day was people.
Right,
so I'd come home and
yeah.
I just wanted to stare at a wall.
Yeah.
So about 3 years after that was when we both realized that this was bigger than either of us realized, and that it was a church was growing out of it. And that was 2009.
Talk to me about the conversation you had with the former pastor who started calling out the pastor in you.
He was so purposeful about it. His name's Jamie, and he was. He kept. In fact, that the night it really became real. He had us over to his house. It was my wife and myself and him and his wife. And I learned later that it was very purposeful. But he had brought all the CD jackets in the late 1900s. They used to make CDs where they put paper in them and things.
Yeah.
But he started reading. He'd underlined the special thanks sections, and he said, "Look what they're thanking you for: spiritual wisdom, your biblical insight." It's like that's all. You just do a sermon once a week, and you're a pastor. And for whatever reason, that moment it hit, like it just downloaded that was our future,
right?
And props to him because it literally didn't occur to me. Our tagline on our MySpace page, that's how long ago it was, said, "We're not a church, we just act like one."
Yes.
But honestly, Mike, I thought a church would ruin it. Like there was a weird part of me that oh gosh, then you got committees and we're like, I just and I've since learned, I'm 15 years in, but right after the Haiti earthquake, I had friends that were there that were dying. Like we had to get in, we had to help. They're your friends. That's what you do with your friends. And I ended up at a meeting here locally, it was maybe about 2 weeks after the quake, and it was some large churches, missions departments. And we're sitting around this large table, and they're talking about, we want to talk about sustainable options, which are all amazing things. But in that moment, I'm like, but my friends are dying right now. So if you don't have a boat, a plane, food, like I got to go. Like we can come back to the sustainability conversation. But in hindsight, I've realized and learned that it's like a radio dial. There's a station for the pop, rock, country, talk. Our station was immediate, nimble action. And there's another station. It's probably what Brentwood does a lot of, right? Which is sustainability, long-term commitments. And by the way, we do stay long-term. I mean, we are still working in the same community with the same people in Haiti.
Yeah, we learned it when I was at Brentwood. We would wait because there's this onrush of stuff. And then after that kind of settled down, then we would find the door and we would be there long-term.
Which is, I think, a really good biblical way to do it because there needs to be long-term. There needs to be immediate. There needs to be intermediate. And it's not that one does it right or wrong. It's not one person, one church can't do all of those things well. And so we learned that was and continues to be our role, which is to be able to act quickly and nimbly. And it turns out the church didn't ruin it. I think it helped that we started with it. Like I feel sad for pastors that I talk to that I just had coffee with a pastor this week who's been at it about 4 years. And he met me at our church facility. And in our facility, we use our real estate to tell the mission stories. And he's like, yeah, I mean, we got to get onto outreach. We got to get onto mission at some point. I'm like, and 4 years in, he just hadn't. And I don't fault him for that at all. But most of the church planting boot camps and church planting organizations, the ones that I were aware of anyway, very much focus on getting your church off the ground and growing your church. Right. And then you get around to mission later. Right. And I don't know that that's the best way. It's almost like, hey, I'm going to get out of college, and then I'll pay off my debt, then I'll pay off, and you never get around to it. Like if you start with it in your budget, if you start with it in your vision, it's a whole lot easier to budget for it as the years go on.
Well, not only that, but it determines who's attracted to your congregation.
It's true. That's really true.
See, if the mission is up front, then people come in knowing I'm going to be part of this mission, and that's something I want to be part of.
And the
rather
truth
than
is,
what I spent my life doing, going, hey, you need to determine your gifts and where you want,
Yeah, and it's not for everybody because God doesn't call everybody. Look, you said I don't want to go to those places, which is because God has not asked you to go there.
Yeah,
and in the same way that I literally can't even imagine a scenario under which I could have led a church the size and scope, that you did. But I wasn't called to do that. Right. And so
how many times a year are you out of town?
Less than it used to be.
Well, let's say in your heyday.
Oh, my heyday? 3 to 4 months. Not, what's the word I'm looking for? Successive?
Yeah. Not consecutively.
Somebody get the nouns.
Consecutively, yes.
Golly, man. You're going to get your money's worth today. But it was 3 to 4 months over the span of a year for the first 10 years.
Yeah.
I'd be gone 2 or 3 weeks here, a week there. And now it's more like 2 to 3 months total. Like I'll be gone 2 weeks. I was gone for a month to Nepal. But I mean, the good news is Nashville, and we're doing I feel like we're doing a better job now, at least our church, of raising up young communicators.
Right.
I learned from some old Baptist guys that what you're supposed to do when you're out of town is bring someone in to preach that's not very good, so that way they miss you.
That's right. That's number one rule of preaching.
Yeah,
Never bring somebody to the pulpit better than you.
Better than you. Well, unfortunately, I did not get that memo. So, we got some guys that that are just great. Like they're not bummed when I'm out of town. Well, like when our youth pastor preaches or our executive pastor, or whatever, they're not bummed because we've got really great preachers and people that are there. Because you can't miss it when you walk in the door. We tell the story immediately. They're there for the mission, so they understand that if their pastor is in Nepal for a month, that it's that's what they signed up for.
Right. How did you begin to recognize that, wow, I have been prepared for this all my life and did not know it?
Wow. Well, when I was a little kid, my mother would tell me that I was going to be a pastor when I grew up, which is hilarious. There was no sign of anything that was pointing in that direction, including I had mullet and earrings and the whole thing. But it was, so that night of that, when I was telling you about with Jamie telling me you're a pastor and this is, it was like this M. Night Shyamalan movie moment.
Right,
It's like, oh, he was dead the whole time.
Yeah.
I was a pastor the whole time. But the things that I learned in the music world managing artists was, you're in the trenches really deep. And these are people that are literally handcuffed to each other. So they might be killing each other behind stage, but they've got to get out in a minute and do their thing. And part of my job was to help them unpack what they were called to do, and then help them execute it and then let them take the credit for it, which is kind of what a pastor does.
Yeah.
And it was those were the moments where it was like Moses when God told him to write this down. He could because he had spent 40 years in Egypt, which invented papyrus and written language.
Yeah.
He already knew that.
Yeah.
He knew how to get people through the desert because he'd lived there for 40 years.
He lived there.
So it wasn't wasted time. It was preparation time. And it turns out the music business was very much like that, like the Karate Kid. I thought I was just learning to put wax. I thought I was putting wax on a car. I'm learning
wax on, wax off.
I'm learning to do karate with it. So. And my whole life I've been a Bible nerd, so I don't want to slough off the theology piece of it because obviously a job like what you had and I have is very important that we are communicating the Bible accurately. And I had always been a Bible nerd, so even in the tour bus days, you'd have these countless hours just where you could be playing Xbox. I would just listen to Chuck Smith from Calvary Chapel from Genesis to Revelation because I had hours and hours to do it. And so that part was. I never viewed it as a preacher. I just viewed it as I just needed this to make sense.
Right.
And it turns out that's not unlike a sermon because if I can make it make sense to me,
right.
it'll make sense to anybody.
Well, the old German theologian who made all his students work in the preschool department of local churches because if you can't explain the gospel to a 5-year-old.
Right. Yeah, that's really good language because that's exactly.
Yeah.
I was getting grilled by, I won't say his name. I was deciding whether we were going to be part of a nationally known church network. Okay. And they did the little theology grilling, which a light kind of not unlike this, and 3 guys staring at you. Define for me penal substitutionary atonement. And at the end of the thing, I'd pass the thing, and I was like, just so you guys know, nobody that I know talks like this.
Yeah, no kidding.
I have to be able to explain the gospel to a 5-year-old so I can explain penal substitutionary atonement, but I don't use those words in a sentence. And so to this day, the simplicity, it is the gospel, right? It's so deep that theologians have studied it for thousands of years, and it's so simple that a child
can get it,
can understand it. And I hope that's what we do.
Now, in our conversation with pastors, we talk about 5 points of clarity. The pastor has to be clear who they are. They have to understand their calling, be clear what the calling is, and so they know how to express that calling in their context. They have to understand their congregation. There's no congregation like theirs. They have to understand their community. And from the intersection of congregation and community comes mission.
Okay, we got to write this down. That was good.
Okay.
Somebody write that down.
So,
it's recording. Okay.
That's right. So from that, you started where everybody wants to go. You mentioned earlier about the guys, I need to get to mission, or what is our church going to do? You started coming back. All right. Now, we've had this conversation at other times about how the Franklin community and the Middle Tennessee area is getting this unique identity for all of the Christian entrepreneurs, let me use that phrase, that are moving to this area who know how to get things done.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question is, how did that firm missional identity inform your preaching, how you do discipleship, how you do church, how you do evangelism?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been with you enough now to where this mission identity is so grained in you that any conversation we have, we're going to get to a mission story. Somehow, and it may be, hey, here's Nepal, here's what I just learned this in Uganda, just told somebody, hey, I mean, that always comes up, and it's not forced with you, it's just the air you breathe. So starting at mission and moving back into community congregation and all of that. So how does that inform, your preaching is very different from my preaching because you start and move back.
Yeah, that's really good, and it's very astute, by the way, because some of the stuff I didn't know that I was doing.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like later, I'm looking back, going, "Oh, that's what we were doing."
Yeah.
I didn't know what to call it. But in the early days, the question was, did our church need a mission, or did Jesus' mission need a church? And realizing that is not a small distinction, and that. The question I was asking in 2008 and 2009 was, does Nashville really need another church? And of course, the answer is probably no. In my mind, it was no. But I felt like I was asking the wrong question. And what I should have been asking was, there a mission that God had for a group of Jesus people to accomplish together that we would just call a church? And so that's where we were just born out of that idea. And so we have been ruthless with the mission. I know it's maybe a pejorative word for it, but I ran into somebody the other night we were backstage at an event, and he'd been at the church for a while, and it was the awkward moment. So he a client of his, anyway, it's a long story, friends, we knew each other. He said, "Yeah, man, I really loved your church, but I just wanted more of you, and you were just gone too much." And, so he was sort of apologizing for that. And I was like, I appreciate you saying that, but that's just, that was always going to be. That's still the same. I'm not changing that because that's just not what God has called me to do. So it's, again, not for everybody. And he's at a great local church. I know the pastor. I'm glad that's where he wound up. And then there are those that they walk in, and this is, especially in those early days, but even till today. In fact, I'm going to do this in January because coming up over this last election, we grew a whole bunch. And I just feel like in January, I just need to do a reminder for those that have been there. And a class for those who are just here, that if you're here because Darren speaks about controversial things, that's great, but that's not the mission. Like the mission, the reason I speak about controversial things is that our context, truth is what is needed, but the global context, mission is what we do. So if you're not in for that, there's no hard feelings. It won't be weird if I see you at Walmart. And at the same time, we try to challenge people to think like that. I mean, there are a good many. In fact, a lady now who hosts, she's leading our Uganda trips now. The first time she went to Uganda with me was, 6 or 7 years ago, and she was not happy to be there. She's with her daughter.
Right.
And she said, when I first came here, you were gone like 6 weeks over the summer. And I thought, man, the pastor doesn't even go to church here. Why do I go to church here? But on that first trip to Uganda, she was she was sobbing and saying, I am so sorry. I understand now. You are our pastor, meaning theirs. And and now 5 years later, this is discipleship, right? Just a little tweak at a time, a little notch. This summer, she will be the leader of 2 groups of 15 to 20 people going to Uganda, and I'll fly in and fly out with it. But that's the hope, of course, is that awaken the sleeping giant of global mission.
Yeah, see, that's my point. For most churches, it's, how can I get my neighbor converted? I mean, I'm being kind of crass here.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have evangelism. So I'm going to train you in how to share the gospel, basic apologetics, and that kind of stuff. Then you get them into the church, going to baptize, and you disciple them. And that is, they learn a lot more about Jesus with the idea that I will move towards some kind of mission, and it may be a long time. You start at the other end. If you come to be part of Conduit, how do we get you ready to go on mission?
Yeah, like right now.
What do we need to do in your life right now what do you need to learn so that you're ready to go on the mission?
Yeah.
And we would rather send you out on the mission and let you learn what you need to learn.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Jesus did.
rather than spend all your time fixing to get ready, as we say in the South.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what Jesus did, right? He, gets to the disciples before they're disciples saying, hey, follow me.
Uh-huh.
And he didn't spend 3 years at seminary with them. Like they're following him and they're watching.
And then he would send them out.
Yeah.
And bring them back.
Yeah.
Send them out, bring them back.
Yeah. They come back. Hey, the demons didn't come out this time. Oh, well, this is why. This is why. You learn so much more when you're in the field doing it, like an apprentice, than in a classroom. And I'm not against classrooms at all.
No, they both have their places.
100%.
But
historically,
the church has always trained its leaders by doing.
Yeah. And it turns out like that works. And I don't want to pretend that we don't have a local expression. I mean, we very much are heavily invested in our local community. But even here, we're looking at, we go to Uganda, they're born again, but their water's not born again.
Right.
So we'll get them clean water. So what's the clean water issue of our culture? Like what's killing our people? It's addiction, it's mental health. So we are investing heavily in places like Place of Hope in Columbia, Tennessee. I've been on the board for 25 years now. Christ-centered inpatient drug and alcohol rehabilitation for the poor. It's completely free. And I've lost track of how much money we've invested there. We remodeled their building before we had a building. I think we spent $500,000 on that. It's been a few years back, but it just felt like a great way to love our community.
Right.
And to this day, like while we're sitting here talking, there are 35 people that woke up this morning in beds that our church family paid for that are getting free from addiction. That's a great investment of God's money. And when you start with mission, I do want to say this, that we didn't do this to grow the church. We just did it because this is what the mission was. Mm-hmm. But there's a thing that I'm sensing right now in especially 20-somethings.
Millennials, Gen X, huge.
They want to know that if they're giving something, that it's doing what they thought it was going to do.
I tell folks, because, I'm a boomer. The boomers were generous, would give to institutions. The generations behind us are very different. Now, they are as generous. They will give you the shirt off their back
100%.
For a well in Uganda. You come and say, I've got a dirty water in this village. They will give you anything
100%.
To make that happen. They will not give you the change in their pocket for a light bulb in the fellowship hall.
Or an air conditioner. Like I vividly remember the first summer we were in the building that God gave us, the AC was a joke. It was like they bought it at JCPenney or something.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to raise $15,000 for an air conditioner.
Yeah.
I swear I gave it the best college try. A whole month of $15,000, and I think we raised $7,500.
Yeah,
like, well, I guess we'll just come out of general fund.
No, they're not going to do that. No.
But then $30,000 to drill 2 wells in East Africa, and it was remarkable with it. And so, but we've learned. So what we do, like I don't know how others are doing it. I'm working on Sundays, so I don't get to go to church much, but. We just stopped even passing the plate. Like we do what we call a mission moment every week, and here's what happened with your money this week. Your generosity set these slave families free in Asia, for instance. And then we just go on. Like people will clap. Wait, this happened, and then we just go on to the next part of the service. Right. And Hebrews 10:24. I know that I got bloodied a lot by Hebrews 10:25 growing up. Don't forsake the assembling. Every time the church doors are open, you're supposed to be there. But as you know, there's a comma in front of verse 25. Verse 24 says, when you come together, inspire one another to love, to good deeds, comma, forsaking not the assembling of yourselves. So in fact, our code on our alarm for years was 10:24. Like it was just a part of who we are, that whatever else we're going to do on a Sunday, we're going to have a moment to cheer on the people and their generosity.
Right.
And it just inspires people to give. And my former pastor was a guy named Willie George back in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Church on the Move. Yeah. Gospel Bill fans here. But he used to say, if you will invest and spend money on behalf of those who cannot possibly repay you back, God will take care of the rest. Yeah. He specifically was talking about youth and children ministry.
Well, you have dinner for people who will invite you to dinner. The pagans do that, Jesus said.
Yeah, exactly, right?
You invite people who can't invite you back.
And I can just tell you, like I sat down with a pastor here about 10 years ago because we were hosed. I had given all the money away, and he told me that we were irresponsibly generous. And I couldn't argue with him. I was looking at the same spreadsheet that he was looking at. But what you can't factor into a spreadsheet is the power of God, the miraculous. And
there's no line item for that.
No, because I'm looking at it too. I would have money for a building, and then God gave us a building.
Yeah.
We didn't have money for, carpeting in the fellowship hall, and somebody volunteered to give that to us, and we spent the $25,000 on wells in Uganda that we would have spent on the flooring. I'm not saying that's a model that everybody should emulate.
Well, the interesting thing is, knowing your congregation, they wouldn't have given $25,000 for carpet.
Fair.
They would have given it to the wells.
Yeah. No, fair.
But they wouldn't give it to the carpet.
But I have to say this though. My friend Alex Matala, who I've been working with in Uganda for 18 years, he like embodies African wisdom. Like you get to see him like, on Timon and Pumbaa telling stories, But he said this years and years ago. He's like, if someone has a heart for clean water in Africa, how do I tell them to change the heart God gave them for that? And now you need to build a Bible school in Haiti or church locally, whatever. He's like, just let the Holy Spirit. And I have 15 years of anecdotal evidence that shows that there are people that have a heart for the local church. I don't have to beat them. I don't have to, whip them into shape. They just have a heart, and they pay for what we call it. We're a troop carrier. We're not a cruise ship. And then there are those, like I know there are people in my congregation that I know they don't tithe because I know what they do for a living. And I know that our budget would double overnight.
Right. Yeah.
But, one guy, for instance, he wrote a $150,000 check for an entire campus for a thing in Africa. And I don't think Jesus was mad about that.
No.
And the church has been taken care of. So it's like when people ask, how do we give so much? The answer is we don't. I just tell people what the needs are, and we pray, and God just moves on hearts. And
individuals.
I tell our people that I want to be the hardest and the easiest place in town to raise money, meaning that if I'm emotionally manipulating you, put the checkbook down. Right. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 9, whatever, don't do it out of guilt or shame. Yeah. So, but if God has given you a heart today, then fine. And if not, that's also fine. Yeah. We're not checking, clipboards to see. And again, 15 years in, I think our total mission spend last year was 3.7 million in 2024.
Well, the interesting thing, and the thing it took me a long time to learn, was there are times when giving, wrongly motivated, wrongly directed, actually harms the person who's giving.
That's good to hear.
It would be better. It is better. Not this week.
Yeah.
Not this week. Let's work to where you can give with joy. Let's work to where the relationship deepens and you give where it's not a thought of the giving.
Yeah.
But I got pretty good at that manipulation in giving.
Yeah.
And you make you live in that way.
Yeah.
But I began to understand that this discipleship, the outflow of discipleship is generosity.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to learn that.
And it's a gift, right? I mean, that's that whole passage of 2 Corinthians 8:9 where he talks about that and the cheerful giver. And he's speaking specifically of an offering for the saints in Jerusalem who were suffering in famine and persecution. And he takes 2 chapters to describe this need. And then he starts cheering on this church and that church. This one's doing great. And they have nothing, but man, they gave a lot.
Yeah.
And almost like so don't let me down. Like
That's almost right. I've been bragging on you to these other congregations.
Running my mouth. Don't send Timothy back with an empty bag.
But how important it was for Paul, for the Gentile church to take care of the Jerusalem Christians, and by that solidify we are family. We are your brothers. And we're going to come to Uganda, and we are your brothers in Haiti. We are your brothers and sisters in family here. So,
well, and it's God loves a cheerful giver. You're going to help these people that desperately need it. It feels good. It's supposed to feel good.
Well, and they will see it as an answer to prayer. They 100%. Will thank God.
Yes.
We prayed for this. Food showed up. We prayed for this. Thank God for his goodness. And we get to be part of that answered prayer, which is
That's a huge gift.
That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, because when you think about it, God could have chosen, he could make it rain turtles right now. Like he could do whatever he wanted to. But for some reason, he's allowed us, invited us to be a part
of his work.
Of that, And it's like, for me, like I think what I was so reticent about a pastor was I thought, and by the way, this is no knock on pastors that this is what they do, but I thought the only way to be a pastor was, seminary, I'm preaching sermons and then someone else does the mission. And I didn't see that as a way that, the way that God wired me, that I could grow old doing that.
Right.
But this I can grow old doing. I mean, there's moments where I'm like, oh, this is maybe the dumbest thing I've ever done. But watching God's provision over and over and over again, and then I just got back from Nepal, but I'm watching. I mean, Mike, I got to baptize a guy from a tribe that had never heard the gospel before. Like there's, by some counts, 3,000 unreached people groups less, but there's one less now.
That's right.
Because of our people, and I'm like, I can grow old doing this. Like this is a big deal. It's a lot of fun for me. And I still have to preach. I don't live to preach. In fact, when I'm overseas, I try as best I can to find someone else to do it because I'm a one-trick pony. I mean, my comedy is, it's very niche. So, and it doesn't survive the language barrier.
Yeah, you got to know all the background of all this for it to be funny.
I'll use it.
Oh, gosh. Thank you. This is Darren Tyler.
Thanks, Mike.
And he's at Conduit Church here in Franklin. He is a good guy friend. Now, what are we going to take away from this? One, there's no right or wrong way to do church. We've done church a lot of different ways. Darren's church started with the mission and worked backwards. Other people start with a congregation and work toward mission. Either one works, but you got to have both. People are generous when they see God working. They want to be part of what God is doing in the world, and when they see your church expressing that, then they will give generously to that. And all of that mission, generosity, and all of that is part of the discipleship. There's a lot of ways to do this. Darren is a good example of what happens when you start with mission, and then that pulls the church into being. It's a good church, and Darren's a good guy, and I thank you for being here with us today. I'm Mike Glenn. This is the Engaged Church Network. Thanks for joining us.